What's up, everybody? Thanks as always for supporting the show. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel, and then follow me on social media on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter so you guys don't miss any of our content over the course of this season. All right, let's talk some basketball. All right, let's get to our mailbag. A ton of really good questions from you guys. We're going to be arguing a bunch of different stuff for a bunch of different players today. Hey, Jason, great video, and I like the series so far. Admittedly biased as a Celtics fan, but here's my basketball argument as to why JB should be higher than Booker. While I concede that Booker, all things equal, teammates, coaching staff, etc., is a better offensive player overall than Jaylen is, I think Jaylen's offensive game is much more valuable to a team concept and works better in the postseason. You mentioned specifically that Booker generates easier shots for teammates in the half court. Looking back at the Suns getting swept by the Wolves, I think Booker struggled to play off the ball, and that made the Suns more predictable and easier to guard. Also, Booker isn't athletic enough to blow by his defenders or finish through contact nearly as often as Jaylen can. Booker is great at making tough shots. I watched him score 70 on us a few years ago, so I definitely respect that kind of skill. But that doesn't work against a great defensive team. Well, the Wolves swept them, and we kicked their ass both times they played us. I respect your basketball philosophy that half-court shot creation is king, but when you consider play style and what works in the postseason, I'm taking JB over Booker and even a couple other guys that I'm sure you will be highlighting in future vids. Appreciate the content, and I specifically love your player rankings discussions, so keep them coming. Thank you for supporting the show, and thank you for taking the time to break down the basketball case for why you disagree. A couple things. I agree that Booker had a rough series, but for a different reason than you think. I actually thought it was more of an on-ball issue and just him getting rushed and not making the easy reads that were available to him that he had been making over the tail end of the season. And I think the Suns kind of identified that because look at the point guards that they've targeted this summer to try to have Booker play more off the ball. I actually think Booker is just a 10 out of 10 off-ball player. Just an incredible closeout attacker, an incredible knockdown shooter. You saw that with Team USA. I mean, look how good he was in that particular role. But I do agree that Devin Booker had a rough series. That said, he also has been pretty reliably great in the playoffs for the most part in his career. I mean, he's been hitting pull-up jump shots. I mean, he lit up the Lakers in 2021. I had to watch that. That was hard for me to watch. I mean, obviously, Anthony Davis wasn't out there, but I watched Devin Booker just hit every damn pull-up jump shot against the Laker team that I was rooting for. Look at that NBA Finals run. How many times did you see him hit tough, contested pull-up jump shots in Drew Holiday's face while Drew was playing great defense? Booker was pretty damn good in that NBA Finals series. Obviously, he made a couple of big mistakes. He had that big turnover. I think it was at the end of Game 4, if I remember correctly. But for the most part, or it might have been Game 5. But yeah, I thought last year was kind of somewhat of an outlier in that Booker had a rough series, and it was kind of a tough matchup for him. But I actually think generally he's been a very reliable offensive player. I do think Jaylen Brown is a bit underrated as an offensive player, but I disagree with your point that you think Jaylen's offensive game is more valuable to a team concept. I actually think it's the opposite. I think Booker is especially good at playing with other good players. I think we saw that with Team USA, and so I think he actually accentuates the talents of those around him. A very good point about Jaylen's rim pressure. It's a specific skill that I think is underrated and very, very important for all the positive impact that it gives to a team. But if you remember yesterday, I kind of read off the numbers. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but Devin Booker actually gets to the rim more than most guards. I think he was if I remember correctly, there was only 4 guards below 6'5", or below 6'6" or less. And Jaylen was one of the guys who was above him, but there's only 4 guys above Devin Booker. Devin Booker actually gets to the rim a ton. We did a breakdown on that yesterday. The main differentiator to me is the playmaking piece. Jaylen's gotten better, and we talked about that yesterday, but there's still a massive gap there to me between Devin Booker and Jaylen Brown as a playmaker, and that I think makes him just a substantially more impactful half-court offensive player. Substantially is maybe a little aggressive, but I think he's a more impactful half-court offensive player, and as we've talked about, that's something I value a great deal. But really good points made, and thank you for laying it all out. And again, these are all really tough decisions to make, and that's why they were all right next to each other in the rankings. Hey, Jason, I think you're underestimating how well JB plays when he's the go-to number one option offensively. Tatum doesn't miss many games, but when he does, JB averages 30 points a game. He's an elite scorer now, and that can be a number one player on offense. I agree, which is a prerequisite for him to be in the tier of can be the best player on a championship team, even if it is with overwhelming support. That said, I think Tatum is a clear. I have Tatum still a tier above Jaylen Brown. I think he's encroaching on it, and there's a chance that in the future they're on the same tier. But right now, Tatum is just a way better passer than Jaylen Brown, and I think that's a big differentiator between the two of them. But again, the gap is closing. Tatum's going down a little level as his jump shot gets less reliable, and Jaylen Brown's extending a level as his playmaking gets more reliable and as his feel for the game and commitment to defense is improving. Like, the gap is closing, but I still think that, and I do agree that Jaylen Brown is good enough to be the best player on a championship team. That's why he's in this tier. But I still have Jason Tatum a full tier above him. Are you just projecting for the future, or do you actually think Ant is better than Booker right now? By no metric is Ant substantially better than Booker, and he is definitively not on a different tier. So I actually got into a discussion about this today with a buddy of mine who covers the Suns. But I'm not going to talk about, I had a lot of comments from people complaining about how high I have Ant, which we haven't even gotten to Ant yet. And so I don't want to talk about necessarily how high he is until we get to Ant in the rankings, just because we're going to have plenty of time to talk about that in the next couple of weeks. But specifically with Booker, this is all I'm going to say for now. I'm not going to talk about Ant in the context of the league until we get to Ant. But specifically with Ant and Booker, I do think Booker is actually on a different tier than Ant as a supporting player. So if you put him as like a secondary or tertiary star, or if you put him on Team USA, where he's playing alongside a bunch of stars, I'd rather have Devin Booker. He just is a much more versatile basketball player in terms of his ability to fit his game into different types of small roles and to play alongside other stars. But specifically to be the best player on a team, I think Ant is on a different tier than Devin Booker. He's so transcendently athletic that it is just like a force of nature over the course of 82 games. Anthony Edwards was one of only 2 guards in the entire league last year to average at least 6 shot attempts in the restricted area per game and shoot at least 65% while he was there. And he did that with Rudy Gobert's awkward ass clogging things up in the paint, unable to catch anything and finish anything. Like, I can only imagine what Anthony Edwards would look like if you picked him up and you dropped him in like a situation with some real spacing. Like, if you dropped Anthony Edwards in Boston's 5-out attack, I think he'd be like a Giannis Zion level rim attacker. I think he'd literally get 9 to 10 restricted area attempts per game. Like, that's how difficult it is to keep him in front off the dribble. The problem is teams can really load up the strong side against Minnesota. It is their biggest weakness. It's why their offense fell apart against Denver in the middle part of that series, and their defense was the thing that was able to pull them out of that mess. But when they went down 3-2, and then against Dallas, their offense completely fell apart for that exact same reason. Dallas knew, load up the strong side, bring your, just literally load it up and take away the paint, and they're just not going to make enough jump shots. And that's literally what ended up happening. But like, I think Ant is one of the very, very few transcendently athletic players in the league. The other thing with Ant is, in addition to making strides as a playmaker, in addition to making strides as a defender, Ant is on this crazy run now where he's turned into like a pretty deadly accurate jump shooter, especially off the dribble. And so again, like, if I need a guy to play alongside another star or to play a small role on Team USA, give me Devin Booker 10 out of 10 times. But if I need a player to build a team around and to be my number one option for 82 games in 4 rounds, I take Ant 10 out of 10 times. So that's the specific dynamic for those two guys, but we'll talk more about Ant and his overall value, because I have a bunch of stuff that I want to get into with Ant, but I just want to save it for later on when we actually cover him, because it just doesn't make sense to do it at this point. In the greater scheme, I think you're right. There's very little room between the 4 players you have from 17 to 14. I would argue that one thing you underestimate is the ball security that Brunson brings to the table. His assist-to-turnover ratio is a huge factor in why the Knicks' offense is successful, similar to their offensive rebounding edge, which nets them in extra possessions and extra scoring chances. That's a huge part of why Brunson is such a great offensive creator, as well as their transition defense, because he doesn't turn it over, and the Knicks don't get caught for easy transition baskets and get to dictate the pace of the game. So I'm not going to actually rebuttal this, because I talked a lot about why I have Brunson where he's ranked in yesterday's video, but I just thought this was a really interesting point about ball security and something that makes Brunson a very impactful half-court shot creator, so I just wanted to share that with you guys. So thank you for the comment. I thought that was a really interesting point about what makes Brunson so good. And again, as far as like the rankings, as we talked about, they're all just really close to each other. I told you guys yesterday, if you put Brunson at 12, I would totally get that. And it's these guys. Just wait. I'm already thinking about the top 11, and I still don't even know who I'm going to put at 11. I have a guy in mind right now, but I'm like tempted to switch it, and I'm going to sleep on it all weekend, and we'll see. But like, just try ranking your top 11 players. It's insane. Like, it's insane. Whoever gets put at 11, it's going to be a problem. Like, whoever it is, like it's going to be really interesting to see how that shakes out. Here we go. If you thought Jaylen put in work for the slander he got last season, just wait until we see Tatum and Brown next season. One of them absolutely deserving of a huge role on the Olympic team where he barely got minutes, and the other feels strongly that he should have made the team and didn't even make the roster at all. Those two are going to come out next season to prove themselves even more than last season. I agree. Jaylen Brown actually tweeted out today that he's having a great summer. I don't think that was about vacation. I think that was about the work he's putting in behind the scenes. I think Jaylen Brown took the USA snub as well as just him getting a finals MVP is just like a boost of confidence and a boost of motivation. And I actually think Jaylen Brown is poised to go up another level. And then I agree. I think Tatum's pissed. I think Tatum's pissed that he didn't play well. I think Tatum's pissed that he didn't play well in the postseason run. I shared the stat the other day. He shot over 50% just 3 times in that entire playoff run. Like, that's embarrassing for Jason Tatum. So I think Jason Tatum's going to have a big bounce back year next year. And I think his jump shot's going to be fine. So I tend to agree with you. I think the Celtics, I haven't done my preseason rankings or anything, but I'm basically 100% certain the Celtics are going to be my title favorite. I think anybody would be foolish to pick against them at this point. There are lots of teams that can win the title, and I wouldn't be shocked at all if Boston didn't win the title. If I had to choose the field or Boston, I'd probably take the field. But Boston, to me, is a clear favorite, and I think it stems from the fact that they won the title, despite the fact that Tatum didn't play particularly well, and he's going to get better. And in addition to the issues that Porzingis was having with his health. I think your logic is flawed when considering defense versus offense. I do think offense is slightly more important, but stars who aren't very good defensively will hurt your team no matter how good they are defensively. Look at Minnesota versus Phoenix. You have 2 Phoenix players in your top 14 because they are offensive stars, that being Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. They were shut down by superior defense with defensive stars. The idea that offensive stars can play their way out of being bad on defense is just wrong. The main difference between Phoenix and a team like Dallas is Dallas had the guys that can do the tough jobs, like we talked about, right? So like they had Derrick Jones Jr., who could guard the ball. They had Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford, who could both defend in different ways in their ball screen coverages. They had PJ Washington, who could be like a legitimate low man, like backside 4, who could get defensive rebounds and help in pick and roll coverages, right? So like they had those guys. Phoenix didn't. Phoenix had Okogie is a guy who could guard at the point of attack, but was nowhere near as good offensively as Derrick Jones Jr. was, who had turned himself into a pretty solid closeout attacker and a guy that was couldn't make above the break threes as much as they needed him to, but hit enough shots. Like Derrick Jones was just a better offensive player than Josh Okogie. And Jusuf Nurkic is a disaster defensively compared to the Lively Gafford guys, like specifically Lively. I thought that Nurkic competed defensively and was a little underrated for how well he worked with his hands and got deflections and at least tried on defense. But he was certainly not a defensive anchor at the center position. And so, like, that's my point is, like, I'm not saying that you can build a good defense with offensive-minded stars that don't defend. I'm saying you can do that as long as you have guys that can fill the other roles on the floor that are the tougher defensive roles, which Phoenix did not have. And so, like, again, like, I'm of the opinion that if you just picked up Derek Lively and put him on the Suns, that they could craft a top 10 defense there. Because then at that point, it's like you ask KD to be the low man. You've got Derek Lively to be your pick and roll defender. You've got, you can put a guy like a Josh Okogie at the point of attack and you still have enough offensive talent around it. That's my thing is like Phoenix's issue isn't that their stars don't defend. It's that their stars don't defend and they didn't have role players that could play defense at a really high level. That's the issue. Dallas didn't have that problem. To their credit, they built a roster that could accommodate that. Is this ranking more based on the 2023-2024 performance or on the 2024-2025 expectation? I think that's important to clarify. Thank you so much, Jason. Love the show. Love your analysis, although there's probably some different opinions, especially on those older superstars. I've already learned so much from your content. Thank you. Thank you for the support. Thank you for the kind words. To be clear, this is meant from now forward. The entire purpose of the drill is, or the list is, if we had 30 teams and all 450 players and we were doing a snake draft right now, I should just say a draft right now because we're only doing 25 players. who would you take with your first pick to build your franchise for this particular season, upcoming, and in a vacuum, so irrespective of surrounding talent, and within the context of being the best player on your team. Next question. Before the Mitchell Robinson injury, Hartenstein was looked at as a backup big. Since getting an opportunity, he has now earned himself an $80 million contract. Wasn't it a $90 million? I thought it was 3 years, $90 million. I could be wrong. How many other players are there in the NBA with the right opportunity that would be able to do what Hartenstein has done? So it's just a huge influx in like a perceived value of the center position. I thought it was really fascinating between Jared Allen, who's like somewhere around like the 8th or 9th best starting center in the league, to Isaiah Hartenstein, to Nick Claxton. Those guys are somewhere in the 10 to 20 range, right? Like these are all guys that are in the middle tier of starting centers. The top tier being obviously Jokic and Anthony Davis and Joel Embiid and Bam Adebayo and like Victor Wembanyama. And then you go down to this like next tier of like role player starting centers or like mid-level starting centers. Nick Claxton got $25 million a year. Hartenstein got, I want to say, just under 30, right? Like Jared Allen got just over 30. And so the league is telling you that you need that position. And I think there's a couple of different reasons why. One, pick and roll defense is so important. And the ability to compete on the glass is so important. But another big part of it is just 5-out offense. You need bigs that can set screens and roll hard to the rim and keep the ball moving from side to side. There's just a lot of value in that specific position. Like within Cleveland, like Evan Mobley's really struggling to score on the roll. Jared Allen is not. So he's just such an important foundational piece for them, right? Isaiah Hartenstein, excellent 5-out big. I haven't watched a ton of the Nets over the last couple of years, but Nick Claxton kind of fits into that tier as well. If AD and LeBron are both top 10 players and clearly on a whole different tier from Jalen Brunson, why were the Lakers a play-in team and the Knicks a 2 seed? Brunson carried the Knicks. Not a big deal, just doesn't make much sense to me. A couple things. First of all, the Lakers had 47 wins and the Knicks had 50 wins. So there wasn't like some substantial gap there. Second of all, last year the East was incredibly weak at the bottom. As a matter of fact, the West went 650 and 580 against the East. So the West was 70 games over 500 in head-to-head matchups with the Eastern Conference. An easy way to demonstrate the difference in the competition between the two conferences is the Lakers were 17 and 15 against teams that were in the top 10 in point differential according to Cleaning the Glass. The Knicks were 9 and 15. So there's two things we can take away from that. One, the Knicks played top 10 teams 8 fewer times than the Lakers did. Second piece of that is that the Lakers were they were above 500 and the Knicks were well below 500 in those matchups. So like the Lakers are one of those teams, they're kind of weird. I think the Lakers were one of the better teams in the league last year. Not in the contender tier, but they were in that next tier of teams. I don't remember exactly where I put them in my championship rankings, but I want to say they were like 5th or 6th or something like that. But a big part of that was the Lakers were a really good team that had a bad stretch. If you look at their entire season, 47 wins, but they had a 3-10 stretch right after the in-season tournament. They were dominant up through winning the in-season tournament, and then they relaxed and played shit basketball for a month, and it cost them in the standings. But outside of that, on both ends of that bracket, they were a really good team. And I mean, if you guys watched them against Denver, they outplayed Denver the majority of that series. They got gamed by Jamal Murray twice. Like the Nuggets pulled their crazy Houdini act in the crunch time on the Lakers twice. Otherwise, the Lakers straight up outplayed the Nuggets in 3 of the 5 games. So like, and even Nuggets players after the series talked about how the Lakers could have beaten them. You know what I mean? So like, I don't think the Lakers are a top tier championship contender. I don't think last year's Knicks were. But I thought last year's Lakers were better than last year's Knicks. And I think like a lot of times people look at the play-in tournament and they go like, oh, like AD and LeBron are both top 10 and they're not winning enough games. And it's like, actually the West is just a damn bloodbath. And the Lakers were also incredibly poorly coached. The last piece of it too is just the quality of role players. And this is the main issue here. Because like Jalen Brunson still won 50 games without a guy like AD or LeBron next to him, and LeBron and AD had each other. So I get your point, to be clear. I get the point you're trying to make. The main issue is quality of role players. I talked about this before. The Lakers surrounded Anthony Davis and LeBron with a bunch of specialists who are really good at specific things, but all have massive glaring weaknesses. I actually was thinking about this the other day. Who's the best two-way player on the Lakers other than LeBron and AD? It's probably Austin Reeves. But Austin Reeves is at best an average to slightly above average point of attack defender. At best. And he's your third best player. D'Angelo Russell, disaster on defense. Rui Hachimura, disaster on defense. Jared Vanderbilt, disaster on offense. Guys like Jackson Hayes and Christian Wood. Jackson Hayes was a disaster on defense. Christian Wood, disaster on defense. He was a good defensive rebounder, but struggled in a bunch of other areas. So, the Lakers just didn't have any guys that could play both ends of the floor. Look at the Knicks, even with their injuries, it's like Dante DiVincenzo, a really solid two-way player. Plays both ends of the floor really well. Like Josh Hart, a really solid two-way player. Plays both ends of the floor really well. OG Anunoby, just like a rock-solid two-way wing that plays both ends of the floor really well. Isaiah Hartenstein, I think, is a functional, solid defensive center and a really good offensive center. The Knicks were a really good basketball team. By the way, I have them entering into my top-tier championship contenders this year with the return of Julius Randle and the addition of Mikal Bridges. I understand that Jalen Brunson overcame some adversity last year, and I really enjoyed watching him, but I also think the Knicks were good. I think the Knicks were good. I think if you just take Dante DiVincenzo and Josh Hart and swap him with D'Angelo Russell and Rui Hachimura, the Lakers become a much better team immediately. Because now all of a sudden you got these really good two-way role players that you can put around LeBron James and Anthony Davis. And that to me is the main issue that the Lakers are having. And man, I hope they can figure it out at some point before they get into the postseason next year. But I do appreciate the point you're trying to make, and I do appreciate the comment. In no world could Book be the best player on a championship team? Totally disagree. The 2021 Suns were up 2-0 in the finals and just lost a couple of clutch games at the end of the series. I think Booker's clearly in that tier. I see a lot of young players jumping up a year from now. Banchero will make a huge jump this year. So Paolo was my 26th man, if I remember correctly, this year. I think I was torn between him and Paul George, if I remember correctly. So I tend to agree that Paolo is one of those guys that very well could have been on this list. And I also agree with you that I think the list is going to look very different next year because I think a bunch of young players are going to take leaps. And I also think some of our older guys are going to take drops after this year. 2 more questions. You said you had Luka higher than Giannis when considering that you had Booker over JB because being an offensive engine is just a much better value than being an overjuiced role player. However, seeing how bad Luka was as a player defensively, where they will deliberately attack him, and offensively he was missing crucial free throws. He also struggled to shoot threes in that series. And will steam out at the end of games while being turnover prone. Compared to Giannis, who is as bad as he might be offensively, still gives you 30 and 15 with his best top 10 defense at least. You can't take the supporting cast being bad as an argument for Luka when people were bashing Giannis last year for underperforming in the Heat series while averaging 30 and 13-ish and not getting deliberately attacked on defense. Both have a second option, highly skilled, undersized guards as a second option. In my opinion, this is pretty much like a remake of the 2019 MVP, but one here is still a 30, 15, and 5 guy while not being less than a top 15 defender in the league, while the other is arguably the best offensive player in the league with conditioning issues while having the potential to be the worst defensive player on the court despite having a great defensive coach like Jason Kidd. I actually saw a video of Luka's game winner against the Clippers this morning, and it was crazy to see how thin Luka looked. And it kind of got me concerned because then I was like, okay, so we're all talking about how Luka needs to get in shape, but he seems to be kind of trending in the wrong direction in that specific department. A couple things. Luka had a disastrous defensive series against the Celtics. I would argue it was the worst defensive series I've ever seen from a star ever. But the Celtics present a very unique challenge. One that's basically unprecedented in NBA history, which is they put out 5 players that can all shoot, pass, dribble, and defend. And that it's basically unprecedented, and I don't think we'll ever see it again because those guys are all super expensive in an open market. They have 5 $30 million players. And a lot of those guys are on existing contracts that in the future would be $60, $70 million contracts. So, here's the thing. Luka embarrassed himself defensively in the finals. It needs to be talked about. And again, for the record, trust me, it's getting factored in, and it will matter when we get later in the list. But the Celtics would have done that to a lot of different stars that have defensive issues. There are a lot of offensive-minded stars that get hidden on defense, and it works against 29 of the teams usually, or 28 of the teams, I should say, because they don't have 5 guys that can dribble, pass, shoot, and defend like Boston does. So like some of that is like you got to tip the cap to Boston for just the type of roster they have. But yeah, of course it was embarrassing for Luka. Of course it needs to be factored in. To me though, I've seen plenty of examples of Giannis and his team losing playoff series because he can't execute in the clutch. You mentioned the series against the Heat in 2023. In that series, there were a couple clutch games where Jimmy just walked down Giannis and Giannis couldn't even make a little hook shot in the lane. And that continues to be his biggest issue. And so for me, I feel like in the majority of matchups, I feel like I can cover for Luka defensively, and he's still one of the best offensive players in the world. And that's why I have him over Giannis on this list when we get to that point. But interesting argument, and I appreciate you taking the time to break it down. Last one. It makes me crazy when you make up shit like this. The Mavericks held the number 1 offense in the NBA to 101 points per game and never let them score more than 107 any game of the series. They didn't have vast stretches where their defense was swamped. That's a complete lie, and it's provable by the statistics. Stop making shit up. We have an angry Mavericks fan here. I'll just read some real basic numbers. In the first half of Game 1, they gave up 134 offensive rating to Boston. In Game 2, in a 16-minute span over the second and third quarters, they allowed 44 points as Boston built the 1-point lead into a 13-point lead. In Game 3, in the second half, they gave up 19 points in 4 minutes as Boston blew a 7-point game into a 21-point game. And in Game 5, Boston had a 146 offensive rating in the first half. So I don't know what fantasy land that Mavericks fan is living in.